Gabe always says brief remarks, but if you notice, Gabe's up here for 15, 20 minutes at a time cracking jokes. But today, and he's really serious about the size of the podium here, so excuse me. But today we have an opportunity today to hear from Bruce Miller, Port San Antonio. Really, it's a privilege and an honor for us to host this event, to hear some of the wonderful accomplishments and the vision that he's put together there at the port. So it is our pleasure, and we'll start here in just a moment. I'll take an opportunity to thank Gabe and the team for, again, another good event. It does take a lot to keep Gabe looking good, and so it's a big endeavor. I also want to thank the CPS Energy team that's joining us here today. Friends, feel like family. We all work together, so thank you for joining us. You know, Gabe mentioned some of our partners that are here in attendance, and I'll say, and I learned something new from the team at Our Lady of the Lake. They are adding baseball to their roster of sports, and so they're here with their new baseball coach, so we'll have something to do. Here he is. We'll have something to do on Saturdays and watch a little OLLU baseball here just down the street, so thank you for joining us today. One of the things that Gabe and I have talked about was growing the chamber when I came on board, and I've mentioned that we gave Gabe a goal of 100 new members by the end of this year, 2014. I'm happy to say that we're about 8 months in, and we've got 60 plus new members so far. So Gabe is on track, and we're growing our membership, and look forward to delivering a very value-added package to each one of you, of our members. So thank you for joining us. And speaking of new members, take an opportunity to highlight a few of them that are here today. Taylor Brandt from Main Event Entertainment. There's Taylor. If you haven't had a chance to visit their 281-1604 location, it's a great opportunity for family fun. They're going to open up at 151 and in Westover Hills coming up in September. That's a great facility, so we'll see you all out there. From South Texas Spice, Gabriel and Ida Signs, new members, and Gabe raves about this Spice product. From Southwest Outreach for Older People, Janie Avila, a new member as well. And also a new member, one of our new architectural partners, Pedro Ayala with Build Texas. And so we've had just really good membership increase over the last couple of weeks again. Before I take an opportunity to introduce Councilman Saldana, just a few highlighted words about him. Elected in 2011, his district is responsible for a large portion, if not all, of the port. He's played an integral role in promoting a lot of the 1,900 acres that is involved with the port. Lifelong resident, we were talking about baseball here a moment ago. Councilman, South San Antonio High graduate, played baseball at Sanford University, where he earned 2 undergraduate degrees and his master's in policy organization leadership studies. So we'll stay on track. Gabe always says, you know, keep them brief. I'll introduce Councilman Saldana, and again, a friend of San Antonio, a friend to the West Chamber, a friend to the West Side, and a friend to all of us here, Councilman Saldana.
Hello, good afternoon. Everybody's got to get a little pep in their step. They just finished eating. It's a Wednesday, folks. Hopefully they're not going to slump into their chairs because we've got some really exciting presentation and news, and I'm so really honored to have the opportunity to introduce a friend and a leader in Bruce Miller. But first, let me take the opportunity to say that I'm so pleased to know both John Leal and Gabe Farias, who I can't really tell who is the sort of Batman or who is the Robin in the dynamic duo, but I will say this, they have worked, and Gabe really leading the charge, has worked as hard as is necessary to make sure that he's put the West Side Chamber on a pedestal that will be really seen throughout the entire city as a dynamic player and a huge element in the change and the shift of the West Side of San Antonio. So I'm really proud of their work, and thank you and the rest of your staff for hosting us here today. So the main topic that our guest speaker will get to talk on is something that is truly important to a lot of folks, not only on the south side of San Antonio, on the west side of San Antonio, but all of San Antonio really in general. And I'm reminded, as I think about how I got this position in 2011, that one of the instances of campaigning is you knock on a whole lot of doors. And in knocking on those doors on the south side of San Antonio, there was this general trend this idea that many folks talked about what they wanted to see with their future, not only in San Antonio, on the south side or the west side. And they would reflect back on a conversation that I think a lot of people tend to have these days, which is, oh, I remember the good old days. I remember the good old days when this used to be there, and that corner grocery store was the H-E-B, this was the main highway. And the main thrust or the thesis of a lot of their conversations really centered around the place of employment for them and their neighbors and previous generations, which was Kelly Air Force Base. And it's interesting as I got to learn more and more about Kelly Air Force Base and to do the research to find out sort of its natural evolution from beginning to middle to ultimately what happened in '95. And I could still picture the day in '95. I'll be completely honest, I can't completely crystallize it. I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. But in 1995, Chris Moreau, who I believe was working for Ken's at that time, came on to the set with breaking news. Kelly Air Force Base has been chosen to be closed and consolidated by the federal government, that it would be BRAC'd. And that landed like a nuclear bomb, I think, on the ears of a lot of San Antonians, especially those who would be considered middle class, blue collar, working San Antonians. Because it had been said about the many parts of San Antonio that you could throw a rock and hit somebody who was employed and drew a paycheck and put their food on the table with a check from Kelly Air Force Base. So when Chris Moreau broke that news and everybody was dealing with this sort of frenzy, this chaos of what would happen if we lost 10,000 jobs, if those jobs had to be shipped off to a different part of the country, there was a lot of panic, and what was necessary was a great deal of leadership. And it means a lot to say about someone, to say and give them a title of a leader. It's one thing to give somebody the title of a leader when times are good, but it's a great new definition. It takes on a new dynamic when you give somebody the title of leader in bad times. And I don't think that by any account you could consider the best time that Bruce Miller came to what became Port San Antonio, formerly Kelly Air Force Base, was a good time by any measure. It was a time that people were really worried, that people who had really relied on that stepping stone to the middle class of employment from Kelly Air Force Base, what would soon become a promise for Port San Antonio, was really, really difficult. And in that time, Bruce Miller joined us in 2002 to become our CEO, having left Rickenbacker in Columbus, Ohio, having proven that he had the ability to turn things around. And so he came in, I'm sure, on day one and realized that there was a lot of public pressure. There was a lot of people who relied on a successful venture here. And let me just say a bit about what success would mean. Success for Kelly Air Force Base, the way that success is measured at Port San Antonio, is about the opportunities that you can give to the folks in the city through employment. And we're not talking about employment for the sake of a stable income or stability in the sense that we know it. It's much more than that at the Port of San Antonio. It was much more than that at Kelly Air Force Base. It was about a sense of dignity that those folks who were employed there felt. And that is the same measure of success that Bruce has had in very, very difficult times in trying to secure and hire and keep and maintain the Boeings of the world, the Lockheeds of the world, the Gore completions, the manufacturing that has been employing folks not only for themselves and their ability to put food on the table, but to provide a pathway to a new generation and a new stepping stone. And I can only say that from personal testimony that my own grandfather was a civil servant at Kelly Air Force Base, and there are thousands more stories just like that in its past and thousands more that exist for its future. So it really is my pleasure to introduce somebody who has gotten us through the toughest of times. Like life, there's ups and downs and lulls at the bottom of the roller coaster, and Bruce has been somebody who, with the stability and the ability to work through some of the most difficult times in San Antonio's history at the Port of San Antonio. 1,900 acres. And today, think about that, 1,900 acres of developable property, 900 of which have already been taken, and 1,000 acres that has been yet to be developed. So to give you some sense of scale, there is 1,000 acres developed in the downtown. If you can spark something at the Port of San Antonio, it'll be because of the work and the foundation that was laid by Bruce Miller. So it's my pleasure to introduce a friend, a partner, and a leader, Bruce Miller.
Thank you so much. You're all very kind. It is so good to be here with the West Chamber. Gabe, your whole group, the business people, the residents, you're a big part of what we are at Kelly and at the port. You know, when I first came here, I think the first group I spoke to was the South Chamber. And so I had it in my mind of where Kelly was, until I spoke to the Hispanic Chamber, and a young man stood up and said, now wait a minute, I grew up at Kennedy, I went to Kennedy High School, and we're in the west side. What are you talking about being in the south side? Well, you know, in San Antonio, there is no southwest side except for Kelly. Kelly's the only place that is part of the west side and part of the south side, also part of the city. What I'd like to do to start this off is to show you a brief video. Philip, could you start that, please? I'm done. Can't say it any better than that. This is what we're all about. Thank you, Philip Williamson in the back. Phil, you stand up. Produce this in-house part of our marketing staff with Paco Felici here. We've got a great team at the port, if you haven't figured that out. I'm just one guy, but the folks doing the work, the dedicated board that we have represented by Andrew here today, you've got a strong organization that's only just begun. You know, Kelly, you've come a long way, baby, but Port San Antonio, you've got a long way to go. Most of what's going to happen is in the future. But to reflect back on what Ray was saying earlier, how many of you were here on July 13th, 1995 when the announcement was made? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you worked at the base? Fair number. And how many of you have a parent, grandmother, uncle, cousin that was working at Kelly? This is yours. Kelly belongs to this community. And we are properly structured as a community-based organization. But now think about how many of you will be involved 40 years from now. Because this is a multi-generational project. It started in the early 1900s. Ray gave this distinct definition of what it did in this community. And it's only just begun. 85 years in the past, how many more years in the future? Without the people that built the Kelly legacy, we wouldn't be here today. And we've figured out several times, what are we doing here? Why are we in place? And this has been a conversation amongst the executive leadership of the port and the board for years. And It's now been condensed down to the back of a business card. We put a business card on front of you, not to have my card in front of you. It's only got a shelf life of 41, 42 days, so. But if you look at the back, it clearly states who we are and what we're doing. We are building futures for the people of San Antonio. And as such, we have to reflect the desires and the passions that San Antonio represents. Today we have over 80 organizations, large companies, small ones. We have companies that have been here for a long time, since the early days when Boeing came in and Lockheed. And we have new organizations like the 24th Air Force, commonly known as the Cyber Command, headquartered here at Kelly. We've got over 12,000 people working today. We've had higher numbers, but there has been some changes because of what's happened with sequestration in the Air Force and a natural change from military work to commercial work in the aerospace community. But we've held on. We actually have a higher impact today in the community. We're over $4.4 billion annually of impact. And then we, as you saw on the card, are trying to figure out how to develop this facility long-term to the highest and best use. So what is that? It sounds like a good idea. It's a common phrase used in real estate. But what does it mean? Well, we found out that it depends. It depends on a lot of things, and it depends when you ask the question. It can mean anything that you have developed to the fullest and to the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people, and does not close the door on future opportunities. I had to read that one. I didn't want to commit that one to memory. But highest and best use applies to a lot of things. What is the highest and best use of your paycheck? What's the highest and best use of your education? How about your work time? What's the highest and best use of the quality time you spend with your family? The best use will vary over time. And I'm already in trouble because it looks like I got my notes out of order. Well, be that as it may, I thought I didn't have to ad-lib, but I'm going to. When this place started in 1916, 1917, it was a result of a failure at Fort Sam Houston. The Wright brothers had produced in crates these things called Wright Flyer and shipped them out to Fort Sam Houston, where the first Army Air Corps officers started to figure out how to fly. No instructions, just unpack the crate, put the thing together, and then figure out how to fly it. The first person that died doing that, because every time you landed it was a controlled crash, was a young man by the name of Kelly. And that's where Kelly Air Force Base, which originally was an Army Air Corps facility, got its name. But the highest and best use, according to the commander at Fort Sam Houston, was to get those flights and those planes as far away from his base as he could, because they were dangerous. So the chamber of the day, because the Army Air Corps did not have money, went out and negotiated a lease to put Kelly Air Force Base together on a long-term lease with the Army. Prior to that, you know, the highest and best use in the very early days was for hunter-gatherers in San Antonio along the river corridors to eke out a living. After that came Belgian farmers who were very prominent in the area. And one of the early things that the people that were at Kelly really enjoyed, which was unique at the time, was the fresh vegetables that could be had because of the surrounding farms. So that term of highest and best use has changed. And then in 1917 it became to support the development of this new thing that was a flying military operation. It was also selected as a key strategic position in its relationship to Mexico, because at the time they were also having excursions of Pancho Villa's army into the southern United States. So there was a complex of things that was going on. And it was also as far away from population centers as they get. You got to remember where, you know, we're just 5 minutes from downtown today. Then that was way out in the country, so it was considered safe. Then in World War I, it became a training facility for pilots and mechanics. And at the end of the Second World War, it became a maintenance, repair, and overhaul center. You go out there today and you'll see 21 bungalows. You'll see 12 townhomes, 8 apartment units that were built at the time. And you say, that doesn't make any sense. But the mission changed at the end of World War I. They started to build it out for housing facilities for the people that were going to be trained here, and the officers, et cetera, and the senior enlisted people that were here. But the mission changed. So today we have 18 townhomes backed up against Lockheed. More like Houston zoning or non-zoning than it is how you zone property in San Antonio today. But there is logic as to how things have been arranged and developed over time. That's my problem. Got to remember that there's a backside to my notes. I was fascinated when I first came here by the history. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, raised a family with my wife Tina, who's also here today. I should acknowledge the fact that this is my lifelong love for, well, it's a little over 45 years now. And we got married back in the late 60s when a marriage of ours, especially in the Army, was not supposed to survive. And that was just enough to have both of us say, we'll show you. So 3 kids and 4 grandkids later, we're still going strong. But I was fascinated by the history here, and that's why I was talking about some of the things, because where you're going tomorrow is very heavily predicated on where you've been and your understanding. But we're a very large property today. Ray, you were contrasting us with the downtown. We're roughly 2/3 the size of the downtown. So that's a lot of land. And as Ray was also saying, it's got a lot of development room. But we have a mixture of historic properties. We have brand new Class A facilities. We have older buildings that we're trying to make work better. We're trying to get into not only green facilities, which quickly became a standard over the last 5 years, to the newest thing that's sweeping through commercial real estate, which is smart buildings, and the value that they bring to property over a long period of time. And the one thing we do at the port is try to look at this from a long period of time. What we're also trying to do is figure out, how do we make Kelly attractive to the future workforce? Historically, the workforce went to the jobs, and that happened here. More and more so for the younger generations and those that are even beginning to come into the workforce. You're in a national, if not international, competition of trying to attract the right kind of workers, not only keep and find good jobs for your community, but to expand your base and be able to provide the workforce that we need here. We've had one customer that we've been working with, and I'm not supposed to talk about things that are in development, and I don't, so I'm doing this allegorically, if you'll accept that. It was into manufacturing. Manufacturing of aerospace here in San Antonio is new. We do a lot of maintenance, repair, and overhaul, and if you look at it closely, it's a form of manufacturing, but in terms of building a new airplane, it's not like building a truck, a Toyota. It takes definitive skill sets. So the challenge that we have to face is, this company said, we need X, and it was several hundred workers that have 10 years experience the day we open our door. So that's a challenge that I think this community is up to. We have more and more thought out, what do we have to do at the port to make it attractive for the future workforce? And it's not just a complete series of industrial buildings. We were never developed as a complete set of industrial buildings. We are not only the largest industrial property in San Antonio, we're the largest mixed-use property in San Antonio. And the more you look at the younger generations, I'll drive 20 miles or more to and from work and don't think anything of it. But more and more people are looking at A lot of the things that you see happening in downtown are trying to attract that workforce. And it's being able to live, work, play, learn in close proximity versus having to rely on transportation. Why is that any different from industrial properties? We think it's not, and we're seeing this across the country where the industrial developments are being developed in a manner that is not going to kill you. We don't do things at Kelly that will blow up in the middle of the night and harm you. That's been part of our mandate since day one. So there is the ability to coexist in some proximity to each other. And that's some of the work that's in front of us as we go forward. We've had some experience so far with housing. We've had, many of you know what the Billy Mitchell Village is, some apartments developed for enlisted families back in the 50s. And they're large units. They're rather nice by today's standards. They're huge by today's standards. But we've been able to renovate them on a building by building basis, and we've got a good number of units today that are leased, and half of the people that are in those units work at Kelly. The interesting thing too, without a lot of retail, restaurants, or cleaners or anything else, half of the people living in them also work elsewhere. One of the things that's been an objective of ours is from the Thompson community, which does not have large development sites for new homes or for apartments, is to look to us to say, do things that help us bring our children back. Our children have better lifestyles, they've grown up, they've moved on, they can live anywhere they want, but is there some way that they can live where we live? And so that's one of the objectives that we've had, is to try to find ways to develop Kelly in a manner that's integral with the community. We have something unique at Kelly. When I first came here, the Air Force gave us 14 million square feet of space. 5 million of that was very difficult, if not impossible, to use. We've been tearing down 5 million square feet over the last 10 years. We're down to about 1,000 yet to go. But that 5,000 is bigger than any other industrial park in San Antonio. But in that process, when the Air Force closed the base, they didn't have enough money to move everybody out. So they left about 3,000 workers in about 2.5 million square feet. So a good amount of the usable retail or usable space that we had was tied up under what's called leaseback, where because they owned it, they got to keep the rights to use it, don't pay rent, which doesn't work very well from a business standpoint. But we're good customers, good jobs for the community, and they paid well in terms of fees and the services that we provide. So I had a short-term development plan and a long-term, and I might have presented that to you 10 years ago. Short-term was all the land we controlled. Long-term was all the land that the Air Force controlled, because they had it for 99 years. About 4 years ago, we turned that all around. We went into a negotiation with the Air Force and got them to pull away from strategic properties that we needed, principally to redevelop the airport. And in exchange for that, they took over what many of you know as Building 171, 460,000 square feet of a warehouse converted to office by the Air Force. Very difficult to lease, but it's equivalent to a downtown skyscraper laying on its side. Hallways are a quarter mile long. Quarter of a mile, that's that short distance you go on the freeway to get off the ramp. And what they did with our support is invest over $80 million to renovate that building and set it up. And they very quietly moved here 6 headquarter commands, including the newly created 24th Air Force, which is now the Cyber Command by our local vernacular. They didn't bring a lot of attention to that because they didn't want to have a lot of attention to it. If you look at the numbers, you'll find that that is much more of an impact on this community than even the Toyota plant. And the Toyota plant was big, some 2,900 jobs. Here we've got 7,000 workers today. And we've got, in the face of constriction within all the military branches, we've got with the Cyber Command and a couple of other related agencies that are here, expansion going on. We expect to see them continue to grow. They expect to grow. They don't have the money to grow. Well, our pockets are pretty shallow, but we have the ability to bring in private capital. So we're in the early stages of planning a process whereby we would build for the Air Force force-protected facilities, which are becoming the new standard for real estate, because force protection is important to your companies as well as the military, because terrorism can come from anyone, from any point. And that's just a sad fact of life that we live today. And in San Antonio, we are very sensitive to that because of the extensive military we have. So these facilities are in the future, but the groundwork is going on right now. Could also include hotels, conference facilities that are also protected, what they call SCIF, which is the inability of telecommunications to penetrate the facility. And then apartments, retail, restaurants, the things that are possible, but done in a manner that is connective with the community and not disruptive of the industrial base that is key to where we go. If you think about Hudnall and the new 36th Street, which next year the last phase will be completed to connect it from Billy Mitchell down to Hudnall, a lot of city money and state and federal money has gone into this project over the years, including our own at the port. But you'll then have a 6-lane divided highway in and out of the port, which becomes the locus for your commercial industrial. And then you have General McMullen, which ties through the west side all the way up to the medical center as the community locus, and it's along that locus. And at the end of that street are 7,000 Air Force workers in what's known as the Lackland Annex, where all these commands that I talked about are located. And it will be along that corridor that we develop the concepts of apartments and retail, in as much as markets determine that they're able to do that. You know, we're pretty strong. We don't have a lot of investment money. We've made a profit over the last 12 years. It's not necessarily a large profit, but while we run as a business without operational support or taxpayers' dollars, we also have enough to do a few things, but over the course of time, we've relied on private investment. We have several warehouses and a transload facility in the East Kelly Railport that were developed with private dollars. We have a partnership with Watco, which is a Class A short line railroad, which has invested over $4 million in rail infrastructure. We have Triple S Steel, which has built a major distribution facility at Kelly, and several other examples where, and we'll see more and more in the future, where private investment dollars come in. And that requires that we be a solid organization, future-oriented, with a stable operation where it is a good place for private investment to come. In many ways, a lot of the public marketplaces that we might get into in the future haven't been proven. What has been proven is that there's a continuing interest, even after closure, for the military to be here, for the industrial facilities to be here. Our rail port really took off with the advent of the Eagleford Shale operation, because we're transloading a heck of a lot of sand and pipe that gets brought in by rail and then shipped down by truck into the Eagleford Shale. And a lot of our marketing efforts are trying to see what else we can do to bring those to fruition. But because of the ability we've had to move forward with new facilities and start to upgrade to more Class A investments, and because we've been able to continue to find creative ways to work with the military and their needs, and take some very problematic property and begin to redevelop it, we are considered nationally as one of the best examples about how to do this in the country. So as things with BRAC across the country continue, we're always showcasing Kelly and Port San Antonio in that process. We get a lot of recognition for that, which is very good for San Antonio, and makes the marketing of what we do much better than we've had in the past. You know, there's rightly so been people that said, I think it's been about 6 years ago, we changed from Kelly USA to Port San Antonio. What was all that about? Come on, this is Kelly. Well, in San Antonio, this is Kelly. But when you go to Beijing or Hamburg or Santiago, what's Kelly? So everybody understood from an international marketing standpoint and international logistics what a port was, so we became Port San Antonio. With no disrespect at all to Kelly, we still have Kelly Field, we have Kelly Center, we have the East Kelly Railport. Very much part of who we are, and that'll never change. Henry Thoreau said once that things don't change, we change. We're in a process of change right now. You can't know how happy I am to finally being able to retire. It's kind of a family joke. I turned 70 this year. My wife is way younger than I am. But for me, that was a milestone. And with the grandkids and everything else going on, I decided it was time. And I think in about a week, you're going to see an announcement of the new CEO that's coming. I think we've got a good person here, and Kelly will continue to grow and change. And you really do need to think about it in terms of the long term, because as I said earlier, you know, this is a city within a city. It's got all kinds of uses in it. It's in public ownership. And if you wish it to be in public ownership for a long period of time, there's a lot of things that this community can benefit from. Being an airport, being a rail port, it's natural not to phase out or sell the land off. Airports don't sell land. So, you know, that precedent is already established, but how you handle it is wide open. And it will be generations. If it goes well, you'll have good people, you'll have bad people, you'll have great things that happen, you'll also have some disasters, but it's only natural in the type of work that this represents. So it's really the opportunities of what you as the West Chamber, how you approach it, how you continue to make it a partnership with the port that's going to make a difference. It's made a difference so far, and you have a great opportunity here, and I hope you're able to bring it to its highest and best use as you determine that to be in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, how about it? Well, knocking it out of the park, Mr. Bruce Miller, and just echoing the wonderful happenings that are going on at Port San Antonio. The West Chamber recognizes that, and we are so supportive of all that's going on. Bruce, we'd like to, on behalf of the West Chamber, our board of directors got together, and we wanted to give you a fitting retirement gift, and we voted to buy you a Harley, but we realized we didn't have that much money in the budget, so.
You know how much I wanted a Harley.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, wow.
But what we did is we got you a painting from a local West Side artist, Blas Hernandez, and you know we give a piece of Blas's artwork to the different distinguished speakers that participate in our events. HUD Secretary Julian Castro, two-time world boxing champ Jesse James Leija, Congressman Joaquin Castro, former Congressman Charlie Gonzalez, all have some work from Blas. So on behalf of the West San Antonio Chamber of Commerce, we'd like to present you with this painting for you to hang, and maybe you can take a painting. I don't know.
Oh,
something,
hey.
yeah.